Thank you, everybody. Just for the record, this is a public workshop which has been announced and scheduled properly for the record. Today is Monday, March 14, 2016. I just want to kind of give a little bit of background and just point out some of the participants here. From the Board of Trustees, Mayor Kinnett, Deputy Mayor Vic Bolio, Bill Flynn just announced he's on his way. He'll be a couple minutes late. Trustee Vinnie Rosillo, Trustee Annalisa Corrales, and Trustee Donna Castell are present. We're not sure if Jeff O'Donnell will be able to make it tonight. From the staff, we have Village Attorney Darius Shafazada, Ed Manley and Brian Coker both here from the Building Department as needed. I'm not sure if Betsy's going to be joining us, and Dwight and George will be making it tonight. I want to welcome members of the Architectural and Historical Review Board who we asked to participate in this public workshop. Dipti Shaw is here tonight, and I think I hear Rosencrantz is on his way. I don't think Michael Patino, the chair, will be able to make it tonight, but we've got two members of the AHRB here, which is great. Seth and Barth and Patty will be representing the applicant tonight. So thank everybody for attending. This is a public workshop, and the public has been encouraged and invited to observe. We will not be taking any public comment tonight, and we will not be making certainly any decisions tonight. The purpose of this is for the Board of Trustees' benefit and the applicant's benefit to see if we can discuss a little bit more and find some compromise on the redevelopment proposal for 75 Main Street, which I think everybody's pretty familiar with at this point in time. The proposal did go through a review process at the planning board level, as well as a lot of work that's been done at the AHRB, or some work that's been done at the AHRB level. The Board of Trustees was presented with a recommendation for approval from the planning board some weeks ago. That approval had conditions in it that included that the recommending that the Board of Trustees use its authority under the village code to grant waivers, certain setback and height waivers, as part of the approval recommendation. And I'm not going to speak for everybody on the board, but there's a couple of things I would like to say, and then we can get started, is that, first of all, I know there's some members of the planning board who are here tonight and members of the AHRB. I really want to, the work that they did was really very extensive, worked very closely with the applicant, and presented, a very well thought resolution recommendation to the Board of Trustees, which, as I mentioned, included the conditions and the waivers. And I think we really appreciate what they did. You may not like this project, and there are some issues with the project that we'll get into tonight, but I think the planning board did an excellent job and made those recommendations on the basis of what they felt was from their standpoint as planners, in the best interest of the village. And that included a building that some people think is relatively large, and that the waivers were beneficial, that we should use them. And I think what you're recognizing the work that was done. At the end of the day, though, the Board of Trustees is the board that ultimately has final site plan authorization, and we look at other things beyond just sort of straight planning. And I think, again, not speaking for everybody on the board, but the Board of Trustees, I think it's fair to say that the majority, in looking at the bulk and height of the back end of the building in particular, and the waivers, as they've been recommended at this point, particularly the height waiver, is a heavy lift. And it's been a difficult thing for us as a majority to get our arms around and to feel comfortable with. And that's why I think, bottom line, we're here tonight. Again, I'm not speaking for everybody, but I think that it fairly represents where the board is. So what we'd like to do tonight is to kind of get everything on the table. I think that's the major issue. It's not the only issue, but I think that's the major issue. And I'd like to see if we can get somewhere tonight. I know you guys have invested a lot of time and energy and money into a proposal that you've given a great deal of thought of. I think the Board of Trustees feels it's too large in the back. We don't want to, we don't pretend to be planners. We don't pretend to be architects, but You know, we've heard from the community, there's some definite concerns about that. And we'd like to see if there's a compromise to see if you can make the back end of the building smaller. And again, there may be some other issues that we have along the way. At some point, everyone's got to have a little bit of give and take on this. And I think that's what this is about tonight. So that's kind of where we are, and that's the purpose of the workshop. And thanks everybody for who's here tonight observing. And as I said, we won't make any decisions tonight. The public hearing remains open at the Board of Trustees. It's adjourned for now, but we will not make any final decisions one way or another until we get back to that public hearing, in which case the public will then be invited back and will be heard again. Okay? So you want to take it from there?
Well, let me get this and give it to Art.
Art, the applicant. So I guess I feel like I'm in limbo right now, honestly. I mean, I had a vision almost a year ago coming into the village. I see this project and I met with the building department. I did follow all proper protocol. And, you know, I thought we laid out exactly what black and white to the Board of Trustees on which direction to go on height and everything else, and then you recommended us to go to the planning board. And I mean, I've done everything piece by piece. I didn't skip a beat, and we spent so much time with the planning board back and forth with height and mass and density, and there was also some why are we here because of the complexity of the variances versus waivers, and I mean, 10 sessions, site meetings, and everything, and then. You know, and then I remember at the resolution part, it was like, do we go for waivers or do we go for a variance? And then they elected waivers, and then here we are at the Board of Trustees, and now I'm going back and talking about mass and density when there's been so many experts pointing in the direction that it's presently proposed. So, taking what you guys have said, I did come here with an alternate, you know, maybe looking at different options again. But each time you've asked me to do something, I've done it. I mean, we cut here, we cut there, I've cut my model so much where it almost doesn't make sense economically. So, right now, I don't know what else I can say here, except that I don't really have a clear direction on where this is going. I mean, you know, I'm confused on why I'm even here in showing another model when I went through all that time at the planning board. And I guess you do have the last say as far as mass and density, so that's why we did the proposal, but I'm still confused with the process, honestly. But given that that's where I'm at right now, I'll just pass this on to Seth and Patty and let them show you what we've come to the table with today.
Thanks, Bart. Good evening, everyone. Once again, Seth Mandelbaum from McCullough Goldberger and Stout on behalf of the applicant, who's the contract MD for the 75 Main Street property. And I think you know Patty Steinschneider from Gotham Design. So, first of all, thank you very much for agreeing to have this work session this evening. We very much appreciate it. You know, we haven't been able to be in front of you the last few weeks due to some scheduling conflicts, and we're thankful that we have this opportunity to sit around the table, literally, and talk through kind of how we got to this point, and hopefully have a discussion about where the process is going. As you heard from Bart, that is of great concern to him, and it's more and more of a concern every day that passes by. So, what have we been up to since the February 11th public hearing? And I apologize, I couldn't be at a couple of the public hearings. My partner, Linda Whitehead, who's a very accomplished land use attorney, and but I'm up to speed on the comments that came in from the public. I understand while there were negative comments, there were also many positive comments about the project and the potential benefits of the project for the village of Dobbs Ferry as a whole. Having done this in Westchester County for about 20 years, it's rare that a project gets about 50-50 in favor. Usually people that are in favor don't bother to come to the hearing, so that was encouraging to hear. We have submitted some written responses Mayor referred to some other issues other than the mass involved, and we did submit some detailed responses, referred you back to some back and forth between your consultants and our consultants. Through that several months, we were in front of the planning board on issues such as traffic and parking, fiscal impacts, including potential school impacts. So we wanted to get all that data back in front of you, because it was sometimes when the record grows in from another board and then it's referred back to you, it's hard to put your fingers on that information. So we tried to give you some pieces of information that had already been submitted to your consultants. The other thing we did, and I just want to make a statement about this and then kind of move on to presenting an alternative that Bart referred to. Because under your code, there's a 30-day timeline to appeal to the zoning board a determination by the building inspector. There were a few issues in determination that was issued by Ed Manley on January 26th, where we thought the code is either vague or confusing or contradicts itself, but there were some issues and we didn't agree with some of the conclusions that determination reached. The zoning board has the right to sit as an appellate body and step into the shoes of the building official. So because it's a 30-day clock, and by the way, in state law, it's a 60-day clock, your code, as you're allowed to do, has a tighter time frame. So we filed that appeal, and we appeared at a work session with the zoning board last week, just to have a discussion with them. We're not asking for any variances from the zoning board of appeals at this time. So if you may have heard that or been wondering why we went to the zoning board, that's why. So I just wanted to clarify that, and if there's any further questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. Essentially, we want you to have a clean list of the potential waivers, and then what we did have some issues with some of the conclusions in that determination. So that's the only reason we filed that piece of paper with the zoning board of appeals. Having said that, in a moment I'll hand it over to Patty to take you through kind of where we've been and an alternative for this board to consider, which is different than what the planning board recommended with the input of the AHRB. It does deal with the issue of height specifically. But I wanted to note one other thing we've done since the public hearing about a month ago is I reached out to the attorney who was retained by the Archdiocese to represent Pompey Church. We had a meeting with the attorney and Father Spinell and Bart and myself to talk about their concerns. We believe we can address their concerns, and the primary concern we heard was regarding on-street parking, particularly Sunday afternoons, and pedestrian safety. So we provided some additional information that our consultant put together on parking issues, which we had also provided to this board. And we also had our consultant sketch up a crosswalk at the corner of Palisade and Chestnut, which would have a bollard in the middle, the bollards for pedestrians, stop for pedestrians, and signage on both sides showing pedestrian ahead, pedestrian crossing ahead, which we believe would really go a long way to addressing that concern, particularly with the little plaza we proposed. If you might recall, we proposed eliminating the retaining wall toward the corner and putting a little plaza in there so folks can be dropped off, and maybe dad drops off grandma and the kids and mom and goes and parks around the corner so they can walk across that pedestrian crosswalk. I think that would be a much safer situation for the parishioners when they're going to mass. I forwarded that information to the attorney. It was today, but I wanted to make sure I got it today, so as soon as I got it, I forwarded it to the attorney for the church. So I just wanted this board to know what we know, and also be aware of the fact that we've been trying to use this time to address the concerns that were raised at the public hearings. We understand you're elected officials, you have constituents, you need to listen to your constituents, but you also have New York State law, which talks about what the criteria are for a site plan review in your code. So we understand that you have a lot of different things you're balancing here, and we appreciate that. But at the same token, Bart is a potential investor in your community who has a lot in this project already and is just looking for a way forward to a conclusion to the process. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Patty, who's going to take you through sort of where we've been with the project and then present an alternative. And we really would like your feedback both on the plan the planning board recommended, We want to really understand, because there hasn't been this opportunity for back and forth, what the concerns are, other than sort of a visceral, it's too big. We really would like to understand why you think it's too big. Because your planner and your planning board didn't think it was too big. They thought it had been adjusted to an appropriate level. And then we'll show you something that we think is an alternative that maybe addresses that. And now I'm going to hand the microphone.
Thank you. And let the record show that Darius has already told me I've been talking too long.
We're going to have to break at 8 o'clock tonight, because the AHRB has a meeting, starts at 8.
Understood.
And I'm not gonna do a lot of talking. There shows some images, that have been produced, not produced by my office. Yeah, that's out of your way. So these are images. What we're gonna do is we've got 3 views of the existing building with 3 different concepts, being imposed on the photograph. So this is the one you know the best probably, which is the view from the corner up on Main and Chestnut. Here is with the building that was recommended for approval by the planning board, that was the result of the work sessions that the planning board held with the Architectural and Historic Review Board, where they actually took our original concept, where we had what was referred to as a more ziggurat form, stepping back on both sides, stepping back from Palisade. They said that they actually felt that that was kind of a weak form, as though it was retreating from the corner, and they encouraged making the corner at Chestnut and Palisade stronger, and continuing the kind of setbacks as you came around the corner next to the Hartnett House. So that's this design. This is with the 3rd floor of the tower removed. So from this view, you'll see more of a significance in other plans. So there's one little piece there that you would not see if that was taken off. This is the design if you took off the 3rd floor of apartments. So what this does is this has 2 floors of apartments with a top floor with a common room in it, which is for the amenities. So I think by Ed and Brian's interpretation, that would still be 3 stories and it still counts in the height, but it would not be something that you would see. So I think that might make a difference. Now, we go to this view, which is on Palisade Street, looking back. Basically, the play park is behind me. And this is with the scheme that was proposed, that was the result of the planning board, the architectural review board. This is that plan with the 3rd floor of the tower removed. And then this is that plan with it being just 2 floors of apartments. So again, if I just go quick through it, you see it with the tower, you see it without the tower, and then you see it without the top floor. We get to this view, which is standing with my back to north, looking down south towards that same intersection, the building on the left. This is the building that was recommended for approval with the corner tower, the step backs from Palisade and from the Hartnett's house eroding around the corner. It's towards the Hartnett side. This is without the 3rd floor tower, and this is without the 3rd floor of apartments.
You want to do those again, Patty?
I have to ask Darius if it's okay for me to do. The lights are bothering?
You haven't bothered me.
Okay,
Thank you.
is that the ones that matter?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, good. So let me go to there. So, existing building with the eyesore, if you will, on the back, which needs to do something, I think, as a resident, I would say that. This is the recommendation by the planning board with the input from the architectural review board. This is with the top tower removed. This is with the top floor removed, top floor of apartments removed. All of these, by the way, maintain the 2 levels of parking with the 30 parking spaces, 30-plus parking
So
spaces.
there would be no net loss in parking.
No change in the parking by any of these schemes. So we've kept that as it is, but of course, that's one of the issues of concern, because having that building provide the parking starts us off with the 1st floor of apartments being the equivalent of the 3rd story on Palisade Street. So it's, when people say, why can't you just make it shorter? Well, if we were thinking in a different approach, we'd be saying, well, let's cut the parking. We're not required to have these best thing for the community, but it's not required for our application. We cut a level of parking, we significantly have dropped the height of the building now, but I think that would be contrary to what we need as a village. So that has not been proposed. This is that corner, this is that building as proposed and recommended by the boards. As you notice in these, it's hard to get these exactly right, but I think we've done a pretty good job with it. You see the existing building and the line, those, that is, that's capturing that pretty good. When people have talked before about, well, these are renderings and you can do all kinds of tricks with renderings. These are the untrickiest renderings I think you can get. You take a photograph of a building and you stick the stuff on it, and I think it'd be easy to tell if these were not accurate. This is with the tower removed. This is with the third floor removed.
Go back and forth here.
There's a weird thing that happens. I haven't noticed until I'm seeing it this big. When you put the brick parapet above the windows that are on the corner, it suddenly makes it look like it got taller. The windows are exactly the same. So the massing of the building, if the preference was having the glass railings or a lighter railing instead of the brick parapet, I'm sure that's the kind of a thing that the ARB would be totally empowered to be able to make work.
How many feet does it lower, the last?
Taking the one story out is somewhere between 12 and 13 feet. And one of the things here again, while there are games that could be played with elevators and split stops and all this, we have looked at this being a building which is going to be 100% ADA compliant. All of the units in the building will be designed so they can accommodate wheelchairs, and having the elevator go to each floor, I think is a real benefit. So what we have done is we have lined up the floors in the new building with the floors in the existing building. So if what we were trying to do is squash it down, we could take 2 or 3 feet out of each one of those stories. Two things I think would happen that would be unfortunate. One, you would then either have to have split stop elevators, or which increases the cost dramatically, or you'd say, okay, we're going to provide elevators for this half of the building, but not for that half. The people on the other ones, they can get off a stop and walk down a half flight or walk up a half flight, whatever it turned out to be. The other thing is that the architect working on this, Arpad Baksa, has worked very hard to carry the lines, the windows, the treatment of the front building into the back building. And Arpad has done some wonderful buildings that I have seen in Manhattan. So I think he's very qualified to do a good building here.
Right there, Patty, that reduces the whole size by 12 feet, that version?
Yes, that's, if you look at it, you're taking that floor off. Now, you're right now on top of this, you can just, I don't know where my little, okay. You can actually see right here, that common room up on the top of that. That common room is on top of here, made smaller and pushed back. So, again, working towards that idea that we're trying to, if we get to have that, not have it something that adds to the apparent mass of the building.
So you're not losing any apartments this way?
We're losing, I'm gonna be real candid here, we're losing saleable, it's like we got half a bread truck. So we're taking several thousand square feet out of this design. This design has either 5 or 4 units on a floor. So this could be the same 8 or 10. I think 10 is what we want in the village of Dobbs Ferry, same as we want that parking. We don't want 8 3-bedroom units, we would rather have 10 2-bedroom units. But I know that's one of the waivers, and there's a concern with the heaviness of the waivers. But if this is 4 or 5, we get the 8 or 10, but they are smaller. Because if this is 4 on each floor, and then we have 2 killer penthouse units, it's almost that you can just look at that. If you look at this in a square footage frame of mind, if you had 2 1,800, 1,900, 2,000 square foot penthouse units with really fabulous walkout terrace, and you put this project on the market, it's probably going to be your 2 highest selling units. Maybe the cool units in the top floor of this rival that, But I think the two penthouses that you get in there would be, you know, huge numbers. That's something when Bart talks about, that this is making a difference financially in the project, that's really what he's talking about. You basically are taking maybe, $2.5 million out of the equation. You are spending less because you're not building as much, but so much of the cost in this project is the restoration of the front building and the creation of the parking, that when you say we're gonna kill these 2 units, and don't forget, we started with 32 units. Well, 32, we went down, we're at 22 now. That last cut from 24 to 22 wasn't even a request of anyone. It was just that we looked at what we were getting now with the massing, the amount of square footage we had, and it's what worked best, because we also, while we don't want large apartments here, I don't think we also don't want to get too many really, really small apartments. We have one in this building, which is one of the affordable units that's, I think, 660 square feet. There are a couple others that are around 700 square feet. So there are some small one-bedrooms, you know, decent, you know, they're nice size, it's not a bad size. In Manhattan, they'd be selling for $4 million in the luxury units, but we're not in Manhattan. We're in Brooklyn North. Don't be mad at me for saying that, please. I'm joking, we're not really in Brooklyn North. I just get reminded of it every weekend when I have people from Brooklyn coming up looking for houses that they want us to do work on. So if we get to that other elevation, go through the same thing. The existing building, the version that was recommended for approval by the planning board, the version with the top of the tower taken off, which the reason we're showing that was actually a direct request that was made. You know, what happens if you take off the top of the tower? Will that make it smaller? So we, you know, Bart said, go guys, you know, show me what that looks like. And then this is taking the whole floor off. Now here you do see the common room, you know, but as Steve Brosnahan really demonstrated, and very effectively, I think, at the planning board, is the program that we use to do these kinds of things, it kind of it's overly rigid on the verticality of it. In reality, like, what Steve did is he actually showed comparisons of what we were showing to what would it really look like, and he had the ability with a program to kind of do it more like a, you know, it fades back because you know, you almost don't see that this is 10 feet back. With that, you know, it just looks like it's almost flush. So you look at this with more of a human eye at human eye level, and I don't think you'd actually in reality even see that. So that's something that just to be, you know, taken into consideration, which I guess is, if I was gonna have an appeal here, I'd be appealing that we are looking at this for what it's really gonna be for our community, and not so caught up on how many feet is it. You know, is this too heavy a lift because it's that many feet? You know, some people who have spoken against this project have spoken eloquently about it being about the character and the quality of the design. And they want to argue to the death probably about the windows in the front on the first floor. And I don't disagree with that being the great argument to be had. And my personal feeling is I'd like to keep the arches too, but that I don't get the vote, and the Architectural and Historic Review Board basically does. So I think that's another one that gets worked out, and we can see where that goes. But I don't think that's a reason to say we want to move forward with this project or not. It's a reason to get it approved for site plan so that the work can be done by the Architectural and Historic Review Board. They've got the skills.
Patty, can I just make one comment?
Of course.
I think this kind of jumped out at me, actually. Can you please go back to the corner from the park? And then I'd love to get the board's comments. Okay. Yeah, so go forward. So that was what the planning board recommended. The next one we presented as an alternative to this board beginning of February, before the February 11th hearings, with the corner tower with the story removed. And then go to the next one, please. Okay, that one almost looks bigger, right, with the story taken off? The reason is because of the step backs on the building. But as you can see, if you flip back, as Patty pointed out,
It actually, it looks like it could be there, but.
there is an extra story there.
Yeah.
It's set back, but you
It's the
see
ra-
it there, and
It's the railing, it's nothing more.
Right.
if the
But
railing.
this is 12 to 13 feet lower, and you do lose that top floor. You have to look at it from different angles. But that's the alternative we're presenting, but we've actually presented two alternatives. It's the corner tower with the corner taken off, which has more of a significant step back in some areas, or the one with the floor taken off, which still steps back from Palisade to the prevailing setback, but it has some different things going on.
I actually disagree.
Okay.
What it is it's the fact that there's a brick parapet here.
Right,
And
the
there's
parapet
not a-
definitely.
And there's not a brick parapet there.
Yeah, it's the glass versus the parapet.
Right, because if you look at the windows, you can see absolutely nothing else changes.
But that's something the AHRB to presumably work with
Sure.
you and
Right.
maybe
Put the
look like
glass
that.
back.
We could eliminate everything with
We would-
those collars, so. if
We
it-
would love to be having that conversation with the HRB about windows and railings.
Go back to the third version again. So in your opinion, what's the total
You want
height?
Lincoln?
No, it's okay.
This one?
Yeah, what's the height,
I don't wanna be guessing.
in your opinion, but not at, in your opinion?
You mean, how would you measure this?
Yeah,
I don't disagree with that. There is a question about a penthouse. The Village of Downers Ferry does not do both, with or without. Yeah, with the penthouse, without the penthouse, this is 2 stories on top of a base, and the height of this, I think, is 37 feet,
From where,
measured from the grade plane,
which is what?
which is the average between, if you take the base of the building and you find the average point, that's how Dobbs Ferry measures it. So it's 37 feet from the grade plane to the top of this roof.
And the great plane is in the back building, it doesn't include the front building.
This
It
is,
does.
we have to do this, to follow the rules. I mean, we could do that and say, yes, if somebody subdivides property, but if you're following the rules in Dobbs Ferry, you're taking the parcel. So you're doing it from Main Street to Palisade Street, and you're finding the midpoint, and you're measuring from that, makes a difference in the height, but it is the code.
Maybe show the elevation, because that building is still well below the top of the existing Oceana building. And it still needs waivers, it's just the extent,
That's my next
it
question.
reduces the extent of the waivers.
That's my next question.
And how much, right? And was that your question? That would be helpful, so
Yeah.
it goes from,
Yeah,
That
these are
is
so hard to
really-
do.
The elevator penthouse doesn't count in either scheme, it's really the flat roof, and then you've got the common room above that. And that's what changes.
Yeah, here, this is the drawing that you've all seen, which has the building as recommended for approval. And the height measured from the grade plane to the top of the roof structure, not to the top of the parapet, because that's not included, is 48 foot 9 inches. So, and that does not include the penthouse. And whether the penthouse is permitted to be not included or has to be included, that is one of the interpretations. Dobbs Ferry's code does not say what is in the penthouse. The assumption, which I think Ed, I'm not saying he's wrong on this, is that it's only mechanical. But it doesn't say that. I'm sure if we put a residential unit in it, we'd be saying that's another story. But if we don't have a residential unit, we have a lobby, an elevator, a staircase, and a way, and 2 bathrooms and a way to get out on the roof. I don't know that it counts as a story, and if the height has to be included. But that's where we get into this thing about numbers as opposed to the design. If I came to you and I said, we have 2 options here. One basically ignores the use of the flat roof. So the 22 apartments in here basically won't be able to really get access to it. The other one is you could get out onto the roof, you could stand there on 4th of July and watch the fireworks. I think everybody in the room would say, that'd be really cool. Why not take advantage of that? The fact that it increased the value of the building and that the guy who did the development, our goal here is not to try and take away from the values that the developer can achieve. Because I think you guys are also in tax season now, right? We're starting to talk about our budgets. And I think a huge increase in the value of this building is something that anyone in the Village of Dobbs Ferry should want to see. So this is the version, that's the height is 4890 here. This would be about, that could be like another 10. If we got the design on it. If we go to, trying to find the right one. This is the version that's the 2 stories. So this height is 37 foot 5 inches. And if you're including the penthouse on top, that brings it to the same 48'9". Because again, what we're actually doing is lining up with the floor levels in the existing building. So if we're going to walk out from that, from that floor on the, from the third floor on the front building and walk out onto the roof deck without negotiating stairs, we're gonna be at this elevation.
Patty, how far from Palisade is that common room set back?
60, 70 feet.
Which is why you won't see it.
Right.
Sure, I do.
So that's a decrease of 11 and a half feet.
Right.
Okay.
And the waiver would be how much then?
Well, it's, what are you waving from?
Height waiver.
Well,
It's 30 feet to a flat roof.
If we're taking, if we're accepting 30 feet,
Penthouse, right? Or whatever that structure was. That's what-
Maybe, that's one of the issues.
So that's one of the issues.
that's one of the issues. Another issue is, are we allowed, and there are two opinions on this, are we allowed to include the prevailing height with this property or not? Not mine to decide. Perfectly fair for me to ask the question. So, that's something that needs to get resolved. If we're doing a average height here, I think the average height is no longer, the height limit is no longer 30 feet, I think it's 37 feet, 38 feet, something like that. So the amount of the waiver would be 10 feet.
The building is the building, and
Right.
we're talking about almost numerical semantics in some respect, because, as Patty said, it's really about the design of the building and the mass. And is that acceptable? And I know the
I don't understand
extent,
what you mean.
well, I know the extent of the waivers is important, but because there's so much, frankly, vagueness in the code and room for interpretation, which could mean a difference of that waiver being 10 to 15 feet different than
But where do you see the vagueness? In the penthouse?
in the penthouse. Patty raised an issue about prevailing height, whether there was an intent to include the MDR2 in the prevailing height provision. Reading between the lines, it looks like there may have been, but it's not clearly
Because I don't see
delineated.
any vagueness at all when it comes to that. I mean, penthouse, if the penthouse is occupied, it counts, right?
Occupied with what?
People living.
Nobody living.
But it would just be a common room.
But how is that vague then?
But if it's just a common room, then we don't believe it should count.
Okay.
The building inspector has said that it should count.
More importantly, is to take the purpose of the waivers. The waivers have gotten, the mistake here was ever referring to them as waivers, which I think we're back in the 60s or 70s, when that was put into, or maybe it was 80s, that was put into the Dallas Freight Code. The waivers did not come from the new code. The waivers were in the old code as a power that the Board of Trustees and the Planning Board had. The waivers make it sound, I think one of the images shown was of somebody waving like, you can just go through, you don't have to do the right thing, you can get around it. We know you will let you go around or something. It's not at all what a waiver is. The ZBA granting a variance on this has to look at very, very limited things. They can't really talk about the character of the building, the quality of the building, the aesthetics of the building. What they can talk about is the numbers. And do you provide a good argument of why they should allow you to increase your height? And the first thing they do is they say, we want you to look at a balancing scale, and you've got to put all the detrimental things that it's going to cause the community on one side, and you put all the benefits that it's going to have for the property owner on the other side. It doesn't say you can't have negatives. It says actually your negative just can't outweigh your benefits. So you approach variances. I think variances, again, I'll be very candid. I would much rather in August, when we brought this matter to the Board of Trustees, the Board of Trustees said, well, to do that, you're gonna need to get these 3 waivers, or these 3 variances. We would have gone to the zoning board, we said, this is a really great project, we'd like to do it, but we need these variances for the height and all this stuff. Got the variances, and then go back and do the job with the planning board. Instead, what we did, I think the planning board was right on this, because they said, no, we want the specificity that comes with waivers to be part of this discussion. It isn't just, are we gonna let you have an extra story? Are we gonna let you have this extra height? It's how is that gonna look? How is that gonna work? What's the character that that's gonna bring to our village? Is it gonna be beneficial? Is it gonna be detrimental? People have expressed concerns about views, but for the most part, what we see, and I've seen the views that people have from various places, the amount of view detriment that this building creates relative to the benefits that this building restored has for our downtown, I don't think there's any question in that balancing scale.
Can I
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So, at one point through the presentation, you had showed under code, here's what we could build, and it was a mansard type roof. What I'm trying, for some people, height is, right, there's a looming building, so for some people, height is an issue. So what I'm trying to figure out is, what can you build under code to what height, and we're going to 37.
Right, what we originally showed you was let's split the property into two pieces.
Right,
We'll renovate the front building, do that, we'll do one thing with that, we'll do something on the back building, back property. We'll build a as of right,
yes,
8-unit, building
Right.
and all that. I'm skipping past that one, I can go back to that to show you, but we've done something else that I thought became much more riveting on that,
absolutely.
which was here. What we did is we took our pod's design, the exact height, massing, and everything that our pod had, and we put the Dobbs Ferry famous mansard roof on top. We now comply.
Because you go 40 feet to the middle of the pitched roof.
Right. We're now allowed 40 feet to the midpoint of the roof, not to the ridge, 40 feet to the midpoint of the ridge roof, which is right here, and we now comply. The building is bigger, it's taller, it's more massive, but we don't need a waiver, we don't need a variance for that. We need
Got it.
variances or waivers for the fact that we listened to the planning board and the idea that having the relationship of these buildings follow their same line was a positive. Setting this back, making it look like there's a front building and a back building was not perceived as being as desirable as making the strong connection from the front to the back. So we'd still need that, but as far as the height, put a mansard on it, seems to solve a lot of problems.
Can you show the south view from
So this is the last step.
The south view from where?
looking south with the three
The
houses?
north view, I guess it is.
Go back to what
North view looking south,
and going back to what I was showing you before.
yes.
Flat roof
This one.
and the mansard, okay.
Now that one, vis-a-vis the Hartnett house, what's the height?
Well, this is the 37 feet.
Right.
So we would need if we're measuring to this height, we would need and we're saying 30 feet is the height limit, we would need a waiver or a variance for 7 foot.
Yeah, how high,
It's 18 now, you get down to 11, that's 7 feet.
Right.
That's basically.
Exactly.
how high is the Hartnett house? It looks like it's very similar, I'm just wondering if that's.
Is that about, yeah, how does that?
The Hartnett's house, I don't know that we have that I can show really clearly anywhere. I mean, the Hartnett's house is a really nice, 3-story, 2-story plus attic house that's raised up, here's the sidewalk down here. So the first floor of the house is effectively even with the, kind of this upper level of the garage. So I've got 1, 2, 3 floors, and I've got 1, 2, 3, albeit the top floor of that is in the attic space. So they're comparable. No doubt that this building is taller than the Hartnett's house. But does it have an adverse impact on the Hartnett's house? Matter of opinion. And I think, if I owned this house, my concerns would probably be, what is this thing going to do for my property values? The reality of whether this is blocking my sunlight, we've looked at the sun angles on it. We do make a difference at a certain time of day, particularly in the winter. That you're not gonna get as much sun in the backyard where the parking is as you do right now because of this being built. But it's kind of like, we also showed the one that Bill was talking about, the plan that showed a completely as-of-right building in the backyard creates the same shadow. So if this property is going to be developed as something and no longer be the appearance that it has now, which, people have been using eyesore. Dwight, I never used it before until Dwight started using it, but when I go by, and I'm seeing what could be, I guess, and when you go by now, you see broken windows and, kind of scruffy looking stuff, so.
The as of right building that you just showed before this, you don't have to go back to it right now. How much higher than this would it be approximately? You said about, not much.
Oh, no, if this is 37 feet,
Yeah.
that's 40 feet to the midpoint of the roof. So you take that midpoint of the roof and you add another maybe 16 feet to your ridge.
And the parking is lost also.
No, that one I showed, that's taking not taking this design, it's taking that design and putting a mansard roof on it. So if I put a mansard roof on this with the mansard coming down to here and, you know, I'm sloping up from that, you know, I get, you know, I don't think it conceals the building. I think it would make it look bigger. In fact, that, on another project, that's the discussion we're having. We tried to do that. The board said, you know what, it doesn't really work. We take it off.
You also lose the amenities because you don't have the flat roof anymore.
Right.
And if
Right.
we're trying to market these ideally as condos, that's a big part of that.
And just going back to that for one moment, sorry about it. The front building, when you were talking about 2 and 3 bedroom units, the front building would have, what would be, you said a few 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom, or are there any 3 bedroom in front?
Let me get up to where I can have something to accuse me, because I never forget otherwise. Okay, on this level, we have retail, basically back to right before where this window starts. So this front section is retail. We've proposed retail for this lower level. These 2 windows are into the existing utility room. So that's that kind of unit. Right here, from this window back on the first floor, is 3 residential units. 3 relatively, you know, comparatively small, 1-bedroom units. And one of the things that we've looked at, and it's, you know, has to get worked through, is does it make sense to do 3 1-bedrooms, or would it make more sense to do 2 2-bedrooms? You know, I'd rather leave that to a marketing thing and have the guys who are advising Bart on how does he sell this for this price.
Love that.
So there's 3 there, although I like the idea of 3 smaller 1-bedrooms because I start thinking of my son's friends and, you know, they can afford that. They're not gonna be able to afford probably the 2 2-bedrooms. This floor, what did we do? 4, yeah. We had 4 units on this floor, 4 units on this floor. All of those are 2-bedroom. And then on the top floor, we have 3 2-bedroom units. But the 2-bedroom units get the access to a kind of loft space within the units, which could be anything that people, they could make it a third bedroom if they wanted to.
Okay, now you're saying in back, even with the loss of potentially the 1 floor, right, so cut it down.
Well, here, actually, why don't I walk it through here and then show how that changes. So here, we've got 4 units on this floor, 4 units on that floor, and 2 units on the top floor with some killer terraces. Here, we would have that same 4, 4, and 2. Here, we wouldn't have the 2 on top, and we would either have 4 and 4 or 5 and 5. The way we would get the 5 is making smaller units. And what you're basically, you know, if you did that, you're cutting from 10 to 8 units, which has certain implications in terms of, you know, what you're going to make doing this. I mean, the challenge, right now, we've got a number of buildings that are going up that are rental. You start wanting to have a good, you know, a little bit of balance what's going on. The fact that Bart prefers this to be sales and sell these as condos, I think is really good for where we're at. I think it's you know, Dwight identified it with the planning board as it was preferable to have this building be condominiums with the value that that brings to the community, instead of having a 3rd building that's rental apartments.
I just want to comment real quick on the 8 versus 10 in the back building. That is another issue that we went to the zoning board on. I feel it's very clear to me, both in your code, which says, it talks about area variances, it says such as density or parking. And I've done the research I provided to the village attorney and to the zoning board that the use is not changing. The case law is clear that it's not a use variance if the use is not changing. It's in the nature of a dimensional requirement. Just like if you're short parking spaces for permitted use, you don't have to get a use variance. Same thing with number of units. So that's another issue that we've asked the zoning board to take a look at. It was in the determination that we had to appeal within 30 days. So that's when you're hearing Patty say 8 versus 10, and maybe you're wondering, okay, I thought they can only do 8 in that back building. That's something that we also appealed. Again, we did that really to give Bart some flexibility here because we weren't sure where all these issues were going to end up. So just want to make sure that the board is clear on that. If you're not, I'm happy to answer any questions about it, because you know, it's one of many sort of technical issues that we presented in that appeal.
Can I ask, is the ultimate goal to stay at 22 units? Is that the desire? Like, even if you got from 8 to 10, would you stay at 22 units in total?
I mean, it's still a moving target, but I don't think the density of mass is gonna change.
No, absolutely right.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I think
we're still working on that. I mean, I would say 22, 24, kind of something. I mean,
I
right
mean,
now,
every time, it's like,
Yeah.
if we're a restaurant, you're saying, do you wanna serve 24 meals tonight, 22 meals tonight, 20 meals tonight?
Right.
You know, there's, from Bart's.
I'm thinking 12 and 10
Yeah.
would make sense for me, 12 in the existing building and 10 in the new.
Yeah, and,
But the reason I'm saying that is I don't know if everyone's been following the New York City affordable housing, right? So de Blasio, who no one would accuse of being a capitalist real estate mogul, right? He's acknowledging that, look, if I want somebody to provide affordable housing, I have to give, what am I giving? I'm giving height, and I'm giving less parking spaces, so that's the give to get. So that's what I'm trying to figure out is optimally, if we're trying to get something to work here, you know, and to give this height, you know, just to, I'm trying to get a feel for what's the ultimate or amount of units you're looking for to make the.
I'm not gonna hand the mic to Bart, because I don't wanna put him on the spot with that. Yeah, well, but if you gave me 12 and 10 and you let me have my 2 penthouse units on the new building, and I would be willing to talk at that point of instead of the 2 affordable housing units, we'd have 3 affordable housing units. You know, which is a 50% increase over what, you know, we're required to have.
And this all still has the 30 parking spaces with the lifts that we presented as a creative way to pump up that off-street parking even more. And Bart would build it with the potential to add 14 more spaces using the lifts inside the garage, should the market drive that. So there's extra parking for the retail, and the condo units are more than accounted for in that off-street garage, which, sorry. And this
Would
is,
that be with the new building, or would that be the penthouse building you would put in the list, or
Oh,
would
no.
it still be?
no, all the parking in the old warehouse is for both buildings.
Right, no, I know that, but I'm talking about the design. If we take the 3rd floor off, would the design in the parking area still be available for the lifts for these additional cars?
Yeah, it doesn't change.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
what we presented.
Well, we've added, that the planning board never saw, but this issue came up so much, we added this drawing. What this is showing is that we've got 16 parking spaces on the lower level, 12 parking spaces on the upper level with concrete that you park on. So, you know, regular old parking spaces. What we've shown is 2 of the spaces having a lift, and Bart has gone to the point of saying, yes, I would put those 2 in, so that people can see it and understand what it is, and if they wanted it to, you know, they can buy a unit and get a lift. 16 of the spaces have the ability to have the lift. So you could take this from a 30 at this point, you know, where 10 I think is the required parking. We could go from 30 up to 44. It does not make any sense though to say, put all the lifts in, and then have a bunch of people say, can you get that lift out of my parking space, because I only have the 1 car. So what makes sense is to have it demonstrated, available. The design of the concrete deck is such that they will all accommodate it. And then let somebody who comes and buys a unit and says, my wife and I are gonna have 2 cars, and we wanna be able to park both of them in the garage, how do we do that? Well, you pay this amount of money, you get the lift, and you can park your 2 cars. The height we have takes the, you know, the only time we get into a problem, and it's not the limit of our height, it's the limit of the lifts. We can't really do 2 SUVs, but we can do an SUV and a full-size car. So it's, you know, unless somebody, I mean, you know, I think this is like you're walking to the train, it's part of this, but I know there are a lot of people in the community who say nobody's gonna give up their 2 cars. Nobody's going to, you know, they're gonna drive from here down to the train station. So it's, you know, we have that capacity, that if that is true, you know, we're good. We floated an idea early on about the idea of the equivalent of zip cars, but it didn't seem to really, it just seemed too complicated, I think, to make a part of it.
This is, I think it's a better solution.
Let me ask you this point, because we asked members of the AHRB to be at the table here, is the issue that the board in general has had is the size and bulk of the back of the building, and they're proposing to maybe not. From your perspective, as you look at this, is this a terrible thing? I mean, is this just going to be like an awful design? You work so hard on towers and corners and things like that, so, in your perspective on?
My perspective is that I can work with the three scenarios that they present. There are so many issues that are beyond what our input is, that I will stick to our purview, which is when you have selected a massing, when you selected a strategy, and what you say is number of apartments, like sometimes it's net square footage, sellable.
Right.
Which if you do 8 apartments, it's not enough. You make the numbers, when the numbers work, and when we are ready to make real comments, we would review it.
Yeah.
It's, I think it's, we've been through many months of many iterations of this, and I have many ideas, and I can work with them.
Thank you. May I just respond to that real quick? And I meant to say this in my intro, that I'll pass the mic along, but, you know, we don't want to be in a situation, I'm sure the board probably feels the same way, where hopefully this board gets comfortable with one of these options, gives us site plan approval, and we go to the HRB, and I'm glad to hear what was just said, because we did want to have a situation where we ended up going to the HRB and having them have real concerns with the overall mass of the building, or the design of the building. As I said earlier, we'd love to be in front of them talking about colors, materials, windows.
We're gonna have more input and color.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
We don't want to have,
Issues
right.
that I see.
We don't want to have a situation where you say, what did they approve, and why are we now having to deal with this?
I hear we're in
So
Dobson.
the preference of the board of trustees is for a lower, smaller building, you can work with that. I mean, that's kind of what you meant to do, what you got to do, right? Did you want to add anything to that at all?
No, I'm fine with what you have said, we discussed that, and,
In terms of this, this is another question really for our AHRB colleagues is, have you already given thought to, from Palisade Street, the dissimilarity from, the style to the styles of the other homes,
Yes,
facing Palisade Street?
I totally took that into consideration.
Okay.
what, I think that they already addressed one of the issues we had, a few months ago was the entry into the garage, it was not very attractive, and I think that they've addressed that since
Yeah,
then, right?
Yeah. Well, subject, of course, to you guys still having to sign off on it, because we understand you have not done that yet. We recessed it in, we went with a very different design. It does not look like the entrance in, to some kind of big parking garage thing. It looks like two really nice wood doors. So I think it would have a good aesthetic and it would fit in well with, the character of the building. But again, totally subject to what you guys, want us to do on that. And we'd love to get to that stage.
If you drop that top floor down, you basically bring it down 12, 13 some odd feet. We know it's still gonna require a waiver of some sort. I think it's 7 feet. It'll be the difference between.
Right, it depends, if you're going from the 30, you'd still need the 18 if it's interpreted that the common room is a
You
storage.
mentioned penthouses. Is there still something on that roof that I'm not seeing? Is it-
No,
Or is it
it's,
just the common roof?
There's the elevator penthouse all the way in the middle, which clearly doesn't count under the
It's a
code.
mental space.
It's what allows the elevator to go all the way to the top floor.
It's like,
So it's not a,
But
it's not a room of
penthouse,
people
it's
in
an
it.
elevator.
No,
No.
Right, it's confusing because it's called an elevator penthouse, it's not for
Yeah.
residential occupancy.
yeah, and of course,
It's not a penthouse up there.
it's almost as bad as the
There's
word,
another
as a word. Because I agree, I hear penthouse, I wanna use penthouse, I wanna put two
That's
penthouses.
very
on
set
one.
back. It's a-
Okay.
it's-
Yes,
It's
this-
not completely up against the old building, but it's pretty close. It's in-
What Dobsbury, my interpretation of what Dobsbury code says is, when I've got apartment buildings, my stories are my floors with apartments, and I can have a penthouse on top, which has nothing to do with residential use. It's purely to do with other functions in the building. It can be the elevator top, it can be the staircase top, it could be the way you got out onto the flat roof. It can't be used for habitable purposes. In the old code in New York State, it would be known as occupied space as opposed to habitable space, but they did away with it.
So how do you have an elevator that doesn't stop at every floor?
No, we're gonna have our stuff at every floor.
No, without the penthouse though, wouldn't you
Doesn't
be
do
able
the
to?
top floor.
No, the penthouse, this penthouse is actually just have an elevator that comes up that you can walk into this floor. So that height, this portion of it, I think everyone's in agreement, that this does not count in stories, does not count in height of buildings. This is the portion, what we're calling the common room. That is the portion that may be counted as a story and may be included in the height depending on the interpretation, which would then make the two-story version, it would make this be a third story, and that would be a 48'9" building needing the 18-foot.
It's still Mike.
Yeah.
What is in the common room?
2 bathrooms, men's and women's, a room that's not as big as this room, that you'd get off the elevator and you'd walk into this room, and then it's got glass that goes out onto the roof deck. So you'd be able to walk out on the roof, this is
Would it be exercise equipment? Would
Maybe
it could be, maybe.
Just a lounge area or?
Yeah, I think those, what I'd wanna do is I'd wanna have the guy who's trying to sell these units figure out what use that is, as long as it's not something that is habitable, as long as you could have limits on it in terms of use of hours, if there was going to be, somebody watching the Super Bowl. They can't operate past a certain, because we wouldn't wanna disturb the people watching the Super Bowl next door.
We get Ed Manley or Brian with your opinion about that, would be as far as height goes, is that?
With prevailing, they would come down to, if they lost 1 floor of apartments, with prevailing height, they would still need for the common room like a 9-foot variance. It's something that you're hardly gonna see, but technically they would need it. It's occupiable space. It's a half story.
But you say you probably won't see it from a lot of different angles, you wouldn't even see it, right?
And just to clarify, the prevailing too, you believe, we just got those, I think, in the beginning of the month, and you're
Right,
looking at,
and I believe
you agree with that?
The prevailing is part of the tables that are allowed to be used in the
For the
MDR.
MDR too. So that brings it, the prevailing up to 37 feet as the required, and this is about 48 feet.
Right.
Or 38 and 48, give or take.
Right.
Okay.
So if you'd like to take a vote now.
How much impact will this have on the renovation work for the front end of the building? How much will this impact? How much will this potentially impact?
What, taking the story off?
Yeah.
It's hard to say right now. I mean, there's still a lot of moving parts, so they haven't been identified from the ARB, but we're still proposing, renovating it and, doing restoration, so. I guess I won't know until we know what I really have, square footage wise. I'm more concerned with the square footage wise versus mass and density, because as we talked about, if I get 8 units and the same square footage, then my model works. If I get 8 units and you take off 2,000 square feet, that hurts. So I need the footage.
Well, what's the approximate square footage of each of the units, if you have 8 units in this third scenario?
The third scenario, what's the third,
Well,
200 each or something like that?
Yeah, they're all the same. On these 2 floors, all of the schemes are the same, they're around 1,300 square feet. Unless you make this 5, at which point then you've got 3 13s and 2 650 square foot. 2 1-bedroom. So these are, that's what you end up with this. If we had the 2 on the top as our original design, those were about 1,900 square feet. So those were, they were premium units. I mean,
Because I thought I had been told a number at some point that it was 2,200 square feet.
Those were the 2, well, at one point, They were
Before they were-
2,000, yeah.
before they were cut back.
Right, it's that.
They might have been the original.
Those were the only two units that are 2,000 out of the 24.
Remember, the original design going back to last summer
Yeah.
came all the way out to Palisade Street on all three levels. And it was gradually stepped back and working with the HRB and the planning board to the design that.
Well, actually, this was the original that we had, where we had the kind of what was referred to as the ziggurat. And this had a fairly good size top floor that had 2 units in it, and I think we were around 2,200.
That's where that number comes from,
Right.
from the original proposal. It was gradually reduced and shifted back, stepped back in various places to respond to comment.
Mayor, that's exactly what I was getting at with my point with the get, right? What's very important is the restoration of the front building, and we understand that that is an expensive endeavor, right? And that's what I was trying to get at. So what will it take for you to do all the work to restore the front, you know, with how much, for lack of a better word, could you give on the back and still make it work?
I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. You know, I mean, obviously, yeah, it's gonna take a chunk out of it. I mean, it's taking a level off, it's, you know, what, 3,000, 4,000 square feet.
But I'm confused, I thought you're presenting the third option as a viable option, right?
We're
We're presenting it as an alternative.
Bill's very sophisticated. He works for a really good corporation that knows how to make things work. The answer to his question, I think, is Bart's gonna be able to come up with a solution that works with us, is viable. What Bill's doing is, he's going to what really matters. Can you give us the project that we want with that? So if we're talking about a top-level restoration of the original building, and if we're talking about the parking garage structure, and we're talking about high-end units, and we're talking about condo sales, then he's gotta see whether he can make that work. I know he can make.
So I'm still confused, is the third option a viable option you're presenting to us now?
Here, I'll go to the
Yes or
extreme.
no, Patty, is that a viable option?
Let me answer the question. If you take those things and make those be within his view to control, which it is, because Bill can't say it has to be condos. If he does rentals, much more viable. If he does a nice restoration, but not in accordance with the historic standards of the Interior Secretary of the Interior, much more viable to do.
So the answer is no, the third option is not.
No, his answer was his answer. He's gotta take a look at it and see if you cut, let's say it's 3,500 square feet, and let's say that's a value of $700 a square foot. If you cut $2 million out of his project and say, okay, that's offset by, he's gonna save 800,000? Something like that, maybe 700,000. So he's going to lose basically $2 million. How does he make that up? He's not making so much money, it doesn't matter. He's gotta make it up by reducing his costs.
I'm still confused, so the third option that you showed to us is not, you put it on the table right now.
We're showing it from an aesthetic standpoint and how to accomplish
Mass
it.
and density right now.
Right, but what I'm saying is,
I think we were assuming that all else was equal, and I
Yes.
think that's what Vinnie's
Yes.
assuming.
Okay.
In other words, that you were presenting something that would assume you were still gonna be doing the full restoration of the front building.
right,
Let me respond to that.
So we'd like some clarity.
Sure, and we would like clarity too, that's why we're here. And the reason I think Bart can't give you his 100% yes, we're definitely doing the same exact restoration with each of these models, is we need to understand where this process is going to end and what is going to ultimately be approved, okay? The planning board made a recommendation that included a lot of things, based on the first plan you saw, which had more square footage than taking the level off. We are presenting that alternative in response to comments we're hearing both publicly and privately and around the village about concerns about mass and density. Frankly, I thought the second option looked smaller than the third option, just sitting here as a layperson, but that, I don't get a vote. You know, my job is to try to take Bart through this process with Patty and get to a point where this board feels, under your criteria, you can approve the project, okay? So, we're not saying we're not here to say we're not doing this, or we are doing this. We're presenting an alternative mass based on comments we've heard. And we want to hear your response about that mass, because we've been told the height is the big issue.
I think it's clear to me that the restoration of the first or the upper portion is not negotiations. I mean, you want as a developer to have a decent building. You're
Right,
not gonna do it halfway.
I can't do a half-ass job here and try to get what I want to my model.
I'm not
It
saying
doesn't
that. I
work.
thought that you presented to us, right,
What I'm saying is the discussion is irrelevant because he's gonna do a good job.
has, yeah.
And you're gonna,
No, but what I'm saying is, I thought that when you presented that version right there, that included, everything else is going to stay the same, except for the height.
and you're gonna put reasonable conditions on an approval, we hope, based on the planning board recommendation and what your code allows and what New York State law allows, okay? This is not a historic building, so what was offered to the planning board on a different plan is above and beyond what New York State law requires, okay? It's part of the overall project. I think what Bart was saying was, he's losing a lot of square footage here, so he needs to crunch the numbers and make sure that works before he makes a substantial investment in this village. We're here tonight to talk about whether one of these alternatives is an approvable project by this board. That's why we're here, but it's a whole package, okay? It's not just the height, but it's been expressed to us, come talk about the height and show us an alternative. So that's what we did, and that's what we're hoping to talk about a way forward on. So I think that's where we are. I'd love to hear
I think they'll be
a
very
reaction.
pleased with what people are willing to give and take on, right? And it is key to find just what is the right sweet spot.
Sure.
Me personally, I would expect that there would have to be some, as I said, there'd have to be some give on the front end of the building. And that just seems logical, right?
Yeah.
Reasonable. But people still want to see that done right. And I would believe that the ARB would do that right with you. And you need to have a living building to sell.
Right.
Of course.
Of course.
The economics alone will take care of it, or a big portion.
Yeah.
I think some people feel that, maybe some don't, but I think that's part of it.
Do the two additional units, the 8 to the 10, go to the 10, give you the 10, does that help you at all with your bottom line? Or,
I mean, I need to have that option for one, and for two, it's all about the square footage. We can, give back some of the square footage by taking the third level off, it will help.
but how does that doesn't give you more square footage, just
It gives it more units though.
more units, that's what I'm talking about.
Right.
Is that enough to help, is that?
And they're smaller
Does
units.
that help you? By giving you the 10 units?
It might,
as opposed to
it might, I mean, again, I just want that option, I mean, it's all about mass and density, it might. And I just want that flexibility when we get there.
Right.
And the building is the building. It's how you chop it up into units.
I'm just trying to figure out, is, if we gave you the waiver for the 10, is that?
Is that gonna help?
I think it does.
It does help.
Flexibility. You have smaller units. There are more twos than threes. Any other questions or comments?
I think for what Vinnie needs, I think is for you to do that exercise. I know it's a lot of work. I mean, just so you're aware, for him to crunch those numbers, you're talking of Ed sitting somewhere here, I think, Ed's over there, spending the next 2 weeks to put numbers together.
I don't think it's that involved, really. I'm just saying, I don't think we need to, in that much in depth, I'm not going to tell you how to, obviously, plan a building. I just wanted to know, because you said, generally speaking, that the amount of, the apartments are going to be the same, the number of the apartments are going to be the same. Pretty much.
Just smaller.
Right, so what else is,
So you're giving up money in your sales,
right?
and you need to try and make that back someplace, which would be in maybe modification of some of the things he was thinking of doing, he wouldn't do.
Such as.
We don't know yet. That's why I'm saying he needs to get back to you, and
But
maybe
to
he
the
can make
mayor's
it
point,
work.
I think that you guys would do what you would need to do to be able to sell the condo.
It's sale,
HRB is also going to be obviously.
but sale versus rental is another thing that, I mean, that's his bailout, I think, right?
At this point, didn't you already make those numbers? You have a worst case scenario and a best case scenario. And
It's right on the fence, it's right.
We're
on the
under,
edge.
we're actually under the
I mean, it's
west.
it's like, I think I'm over the edge, I mean,
Ideally, the same.
right.
I mean, the
It's
same
not a
industry
pretty
and
picture,
you.
put it that way.
It's already, those numbers are already crunched.
Right.
Know that.
Right.
I was just gonna say, you know, I think we have to leave all the numbers
Yeah.
to you. It's not, you know, really in our purview, but I think one thing that's been clear of all of, at least what I've observed of the board, and then of all the community members that have spoken, both those who have spoken for and against, one theme that was very clear to me that I heard from everyone who spoke was that they very much favor the restoration of the Oceana building to the neoclassical standard. And, you know, I think if that were to be taken off the table, or if there was
Are
a
you talking about
significant,
windows? Is that what you're saying? Are you talking the windows?
or to a historic
There's a
standard.
certain interior standard.
An appropriate historic standard. I think everyone agreed on the neoclassical, you're right. But to a historic standard, I think that was something that everyone agreed on. And if you're talking about, I guess, taking that back significantly, then that's just something that we would wanna know.
Right, I don't think we said that, we just.
I don't
Yeah,
think that, I don't, my intent, that's not my
I
business.
just wanna be clear.
I mean, that's
But
not
it's,
the
it's
business
the,
here.
it's the creep in the process that, is what we're concerned about. We said we would, you know, an appropriate historic standard, great terminology, exactly the right thing. What's kind of turned into is in compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standard for a higher level of standard than rehabilitation.
Right, which basically showed up in the planning board's recommendation, it's
Right,
something.
and along those
They
same
recommend.
lines, we said, we're going to take lead standards, and we're going to be very cognizant of them all the way through, even to the point of filling out all the forms, so we can show the building department what our score would be. So you can see that this would be a gold lead building or something like that, but we weren't proposing that we would go lead. And the resolution somehow got it that we would be doing a lead building. That adds several $100,000 of cost with no benefit to the environment.
I understand.
So, along those lines, if I may, if we could take, if it's okay with the board, take a couple minutes, just talk about sort of next steps, because, you know, obviously, I think this was a very productive discussion. We really appreciate the opportunity to sit down in this environment and have a conversation. But Bart is, you know, has a contract that he has obligations under, and we're trying to understand next steps, and we would love to be able to get on the next available agenda for any additional public comment. My understanding, I wasn't there, but according to my partner, you know, the public had commented to a large extent. It didn't seem like there were necessarily any additional comments at that time. So we'd love to see the board consider closing the public hearing and making a decision at the earliest possible opportunity. And we'd like to know, you know, if there's a date that we could hear from you that we would be back on your agenda for that purpose.
Thanks, Ed. Everybody okay? There are questions? I think the answer to that is the public hearing remains open, and we do want to get you back there following this public workshop. I think, I think this might have been a good step. I think you all need to think a little bit more about, you know, sort of, you need to crunch your numbers, we can't crunch the numbers for you, in terms of being a little bit more clear about if this is a viable alternative and what it means in terms of, you know, how many units, whether it's 8 or 10 in the back. Sounds like you're saying you really need 10, which makes it what, then a 24? We're back at sort of 24.
Maximum.
10 is a little different than what was originally proposed of 8. And then the restoration of the front of the building, which is, you know, as important to you, I think, is
You gotta do the
community.
the
So,
restoration is.
and just how much
it's a
that,
must.
if any,
It's
is
not
gonna
even a
be impacted
conversation.
on this.
You have to do it. I mean, it's like, it's a given.
What we'd like to do then is, the next step is,
I can say that if you want.
That's
Okay.
all right.
I
So,
mean,
Say
the
something?
restoration is, it's a done deal. I mean, you have to do it.
okay,
It's not, I mean, it
That's
doesn't go
important.
down, it looks like,
okay.
it needs it.
Okay, so I think, no guarantees here, but I think this is a good step. We want the public to see this. We want the public to comment on this. I think that's the next step. Whether or not we do this at our next regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Trustees or sometime soon thereafter, we'll let you know. We know timing is important here.
Yeah,
You've been at this a long time,
I
the
mean,
community's
that's
been at this for a long time as
Sure.
well. I mean, we can only hear kind of so much after a period of time, and it begins to start to run together, but.
You might hear more positive comments.
We might, and that wouldn't be a bad thing. So, why don't we leave it at that, and we will communicate to the public exactly when we go back and reopen the public hearing, and when that will be, we'll give everybody full notice of that, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I have Darius to sell, you're up around 6 tomorrow, right?
I'd like to thank the members of the AHRB who sat in here, and Dick, thank you for coming tonight. Seth, Barth, Patty, thank you for your
Thank you.
presentation. Thank the trustees for sitting in the building department for staying here. I want to thank all the residents who came and observed as well. That's it.
We'll see you soon.
Okay.
Thanks.
Right.